Carissa Dez here reporting for Village Portland. Today I spoke with Mingus Mapps, who just won City Council position 4 seat. I spoke with him a little bit about what he sees in Portland's future and some changes that he's hoping to make. I know you're a longtime Portland resident. What brought you to the area?
Oh, I've had family here for my whole life. The Mappses have been coming up to Portland since the 1960s, largely to go to school. I have 2 aunts and an uncle who went to Reed College, and they started in the 60s and eventually in the 80s, I guess. I wound up going to Reed too, and then after Reed, stuck around town for a while and did some public policy work and worked on some political campaigns before going off and getting my PhD in government.
Oh, wow. That's impressive. Can you tell me a little bit more about yourself? Your background?
Sure. I'm a single dad. I have 2 boys, a 10-year-old and an 11-year-old. Their names are Langston and Coltrane. We're all going to school by Zoom with mixed success, but actually everyone's healthy, and sometimes we're happy, and we're doing okay. And for COVID year 2020, just doing okay is just fine.
Yep, we're all doing the best we can. So what are your main goals as commissioner in the future, in the near future?
Oh gosh, sure, absolutely. Well, you know, we're at this weird moment where you need to have about 4 or 5 number 1 priorities, and that's just what it's like in 2020. My top priority is to conquer COVID. We've been talking about this for 7 months now. If you are following the news or looking at our COVID numbers, you know that this crisis is as worse as it's ever been. And as we head into the rainy season, it could get really bad. So I want to make sure that people stay healthy, and I also want to make sure that people stay housed. So we'll be when we're on council, we'll be working on the public health side and the economic side. I want to make sure that no one loses their home, whether it's a rental home or a home that they're trying to buy themselves. I'm also deeply concerned about our local businesses. I just came back from a meeting downtown, which is still a canyon of plywood, as businesses are either just shut down or hiding behind barriers. So I want to make sure that they are able to open up again in some sort of safe way. I hope that we can keep a lot of these, especially small businesses, operational through the next 6 months. After we get that, I'm deeply concerned about the houselessness problem, which also is tied into the COVID problem. I think some of our most vulnerable Portlanders at this COVID crisis are the ones who are sleeping on the streets. So I think this winter we need to focus in on getting those folks inside, or at least into organized camps where they have access to hygiene and hand washing stations. After that, I'm deeply concerned about climate change. I'm really excited to get into City Hall and bring an environmental perspective to whatever bureau I get. And I'm also deeply concerned about public safety reform. I'm not one of these folks who thinks that we should abolish police, but I do think that we should come together as a community and re-envision how we go about keeping each other safe and explore new ways to do that. My own sort of personal bias here is that I think that the police should be at the table as we think about public safety, but we have made a mistake as a city and in a country when we place the police at the center of our public safety strategies. And I also deeply want to make sure that we reform our form of government. Portland's famous for our commission form of government. If you want to talk about that in more depth, we can. But my argument in this campaign has been the commission form of government has largely failed the city. It's one of the reasons why we're struggling right now. And if we were to do some common sense, good government practices like hiring a city manager to coordinate services across different city bureaus, we would have a more efficient government, and we'd actually be able to make progress on things like homelessness and affordable housing and even like COVID control. And finally, I want to make Portland a city where Black Lives Matter.
Excellent. So the first topic that you talked about was houselessness, particular goals for helping that community.
I think one of the things that I really care about that we should focus in as a city on is ending chronic houselessness in Portland. One of the things that I think is easy to miss in our town is that there's a core of about 4,000 Portlanders who sleep on the streets every night. And those folks are on the streets, not necessarily just because of economic issues. There's usually some other compounding factors, something like drug addiction or mental health issues or disability or age. These folks, are not going to wake up tomorrow and decide that they have been living their life in a wrong way. I'm decided to go out and get a job and a mortgage and a house. Instead, these folks are outside because they are facing enormous challenges. One of the things I think we have to do as a community is to prioritize getting those folks into stable, supportive housing. And if we do that, I think one of the things that we could do as a community is to end chronic houselessness in our city. We could end the tradition of street camping, and I think that would be great for the folks who have been sleeping on the streets, and I think it's also would be great for the city. And after that, I'm deeply concerned about doing things like getting the police out of the business of being in Portland, the police are essentially our first responders on
everything.
Yeah, to everything, including those are essentially our houseless outreach workers, which is crazy. If you take a look at police 911 calls, about half of those are literally reaching out to a houseless person who's going through some sort of mental health crisis in a public space. And when a cop shows up in a situation like that, what tools do they? Where they can tell that person to get in the car and they'll take them downtown and put them in jail for about 5 hours. That's terrible public service. That's why I'm a huge supporter of programs like the street response teams, which instead of sending out a cop to respond to a houseless person going through a mental health crisis, we would actually send out a mental health worker and someone trained in conflict de-escalation. There's a lot of promise in that program. We're still trying to get it up and running. But when I'm on council, one of the things I'm going to do is do everything I can to get that program up and running as soon as we can, and then expand it citywide. And then I think we need to do common sense things like bring more affordable housing online so people don't fall into houselessness in the first place, especially during this COVID era. I think one of the things that is just true is that the best homelessness policy is to prevent people from falling into houselessness in the first place. That's why I want to dramatically increase the amount of dollars that we devote to emergency rental assistance, especially during this COVID crisis. No one should be out on the streets in the midst of all this. I think it's important to remember is that there are many different kinds of homeless people. In fact, every homeless person is unique and should be sort of approached as a unique person. Some people just need a little bit of shelter while they get themselves back on their feet. Other folks need shelter and mental health care, and everyone needs a sense of community. So those are some of the strategies that we'll bring to this problem when we're in City Hall.
Definitely, I agree. Are you still working at the or with the nonprofit Park Rose?
Oh no, I left Historic Park Rose is always in my heart. I love that neighborhood, but I left that. I left Historic Park Rose probably about 3 years ago, I think.
Okay. Yeah, the article I read was a little bit older. I think it was from 2016, so I wasn't sure if you were still had
and in fact, I was just talking just this morning. I was talking to Josh Kingsley, who was the priest, the Episcopalian priest who used to pastor over St. Matthew's out in Park Rose this morning. And he's moved on to other stuff too, but he's doing great stuff around houselessness here in Portland and trying to gather together the church communities to help provide more affordable housing. So Park Rose has been great to the entire city. Lots of exciting ideas there, which are being implemented in every corner of Portland. So deeply grateful to those folks.
The next thing I'll talk about, which you kind of touched on, was police reform. You said that you're not about police abolishment or defunding, but I have heard you speak about, maybe less funds going to the police and more going to different programs?
First, I think process matters. One of the things that I want to do when I'm on council is to reach out to the community and take the ideas that we've seen on the streets over the past 7 months and bring them inside City Hall so we can translate them into policies and programs. One of the things I also am going to challenge Portland to do is to approach this problem not in terms of how much do we cut from the police, and we should all be clear that because of the budget constraints that we face due to COVID, every program in the city is likely to face cuts, including the police department. This is both a crisis and an opportunity. We as a community, I think, should come together to think about the kind of public safety system that we want. And this is a conversation I've literally had thousands of times over the last 18 months. And I do see a Portland consensus out there, even though at times it seems like we're in conflict. And I think that Portland consensus is, we want a police system that reflects our values. I think we also want a police system that emphasizes prevention and rehabilitation. I think we want a police system and public safety system that emphasizes human dignity and is fundamentally a tool for dismantling racism as opposed to perpetuating it. In terms of the specific kind of public safety policies which resonate with me and that I'll kind of focus on when I'm on city council is I'll try to get us to shift dollars into prevention programs. I also am a huge fan of community policing. If you've read stories about me in the Willamette Week around my public safety work, that was really about community policing, which is basically pulling neighbors together. When we were out in Park Rose, what we do is we pull together the residents and the businesses and the church leaders, just like my good friend and priest, Josh Kingsley, and the schools, and frankly, the police department, to take a look at the challenges that we were facing in a very specific neighborhood, and not in an abstract sense, but more like this particular camp is causing problems because they're not picking up their garbage, or we continually have cars being dumped in front of this church because no one's there 6 days a week, and so it's a good place to kind of dump things after you've stolen them. And then just work in a really concrete way to kind of solve problems like that. And it's enormously effective, especially when you get everybody at the table. And often, the solutions to problems like that are not the police, but rather it's the community. But sometimes the cops need to be there. There are some situations which I've seen, the human trafficking, violence.
Gun violence.
Gun violence, which is another huge problem. And so I'm a huge fan of community policing, evidence-based policing. Obviously we need to do all the kind of common sense, human and, decent racial reforms there. So let's ban chokeholds, let's ban cooperation with ICE. And I'm also, at the table because we have this great opportunity to reinvent independent oversight of our public safety system. I think that's great. I think that's one of the things that the people have clearly demanded if you take a look at our most recent elections. And I'm excited to be at the table with the rest of Portland to figure out how we make this work.
So do you think third-party oversight is the way to go? Are you kind of...
Yeah, yes, indeed I do. I think it's one of the ways that we hold our public safety system accountable. There are lots of different issues there. Everything from, what tools does, independent police review have? Should independent oversight have the power to change police policies? Should we have an independent group have the power to discipline police? And how do you go about protecting records? And, my opinion is, we should have a highly empowered, independent oversight system. I'm not sure if an independent group should have the power to outright change police policies, but they sure should have the power to make recommendations to city council about what policies should be changed. Should independent groups have the power to discipline police officers? I think that's another dicey thing, but my mind is open to having that conversation. And I'm a big believer in transparency. So, I think any records that get produced through the process of auditing and overlook and providing the police with independent oversight should be public record and accessible to anyone who's interested.
Definitely. We spoke a little bit about less funds going to the police, but that's not like, your main focus. But if we're wanting better police training or more police training, how are we going to do that with less money? Are we taking from their other programs and using money toward police training, or?
This is going to be literally about 100 very difficult and very specific choices. You can either sacrifice bodies or you can sacrifice benefits. One of the things we're going to be doing as a council and a community is to think about, which do we sacrifice and how. So I look forward to being at the table as we have these discussions. We've already had some. One of the reasons why I'm being non-specific here is that we still don't know exactly what our budget looks like. Let's just say we were agnostic about cutting the police. We're still going to do it because we know that our budget, we face a deficit next year, but we don't know the size of that deficit. But I think by Thanksgiving, we should have a pretty good sense of where we're at. And that gets us to a sense of where we're talking a $5 million cut, a $10 million cut, $20 million cut. I hope it's not 20, but that's where that comes in. And then, and I do hope that people think about this we're in the middle of the budget cycle right now, and we need to make some cuts just to acknowledge the COVID realities. But after we acknowledge and deal with the COVID realities and rebalance our budget, then, I think we have an opportunity through the rest of the winter and the spring to really do the kind of planning and visioning we want for, our next public safety system, public safety system 2.0, whatever you want to call it.
Great. Have you already started, other than planning, have you ever already started your in your commissioner role, or when does that start, and how does that start for you to start planning? Because I know that you're already thinking about all of the, your plans, and you're very clear on them. So have you already, when do you step into that role?
Sure. So I am not officially your commissioner until January 3rd, I think is the day that I actually start. But I'll tell you the truth. We are working about 12 hours a day, 6 days a week already. We've already begun to assemble our staff, and we'll do our swearing in. So there's a lot of just back office work that needs to be done now, but we're very much on the job, and we'll remain on the job until we officially take over. But in the meantime, we're getting organized, hiring folks, taking a look at policies, talking to the mayor about what bureaus we get, and looking forward and meeting with businesses and community members and church leaders, and frankly, houseless folks, to see how we can be good public servants to them.
And I also know that you contacted thousands of Portland, or people from the Portland community.
Yeah.
Was that, were you doing that all along, or is that something that you were doing right before your campaign, or was it something that you were doing during your campaign?
That was our kind of campaign strategy, was to, this was an interesting election cycle because you saw, I think, different candidates adopt different approaches to campaigning. Some folks were great on Twitter, and some folks had great video. What we really did was just focus on, frankly, individual voter contact. So I probably made 15,000 phone calls over the course of the past 18 months. We did hundreds of house parties, and basically got here one conversation at a time.
Yeah, well, I think that's a great way to go about it. Seeing what the people want, and trying to do work with them.
I wouldn't replace it over. Yeah, even if there was another option, an alternative strategy might have been to, and we didn't have money for this, but an alternative strategy would be just to be on TV all the time. But for me, it just felt great to actually connect with people. I'm a lifelong learner, and I tell you, I have learned more over the course of the past 18 months than I have over my entire life. It feels like. It's great to hear where people are at, and I think it's been particularly important this election cycle, where everything is just sort of so topsy-turvy between COVID and the demand for public safety reform and the protests and the wildfires. There's no intuitive way to kind of necessarily know how the city's doing, but, you know, making 30 phone calls a day to strangers to, you know, both check in on them and tell them about your vision for the city was a great way to take the temperature of our city and stay in touch with where our city was at.
Did you speak to a lot of protesters when you were calling people, or were you on the ground talking to them?
Absolutely. We tried as much as we could. We tried to get out and both participate in, you know, marches, protests, whatnot. And the folks who are in that community did a great job of reaching out to me to let them know, to let us know what they were thinking, which is how I kind of came to the conclusion that there is a Portland consensus. You know, I don't see a real debate here. I think everyone wants to reinvent public safety. It's more a question of, I don't even think it's that much of a question of how. You know, I think everyone's kind of pointing towards prevention and broadening our approach, bringing more tools to the table or putting more tools in our toolbox. So, you know, not just focusing on the police, but also looking at the mental health side of this. And one of the things that we quietly tried to do over the course of the campaign is to literally have meetings with real ground level protesters or, you know, BLM activists to see where they're at. We experimented some with like having very quiet community meetings with Black Lives protesters and frankly members of the police department, so those groups could kind of talk and share their perspectives. I think those were incredibly fruitful, and I think it caused everyone to kind of see everyone else's perspective a little bit more clearly. And even then, in that kind of setting, I didn't see. I felt everyone kind of trapped in a system, but I think that everyone shared the same values and the same goals, which actually made me really optimistic. We can fix this.
Yeah, I agree. So I've been kind of following the protests. So I see things from the protesters' point of view a lot of times, but I also don't want to be in an echo chamber. So I've been, you know, interviewing people that are out, you know, that are for the protest, but they're not a part of it, and also people that aren't for the protesting. So I've tried to, you know, look at things from a broad point of view. And I've noticed that a lot of protesters on the ground are for abolishing the police. But then, you know, we have people that are like, that would never happen. So do you think that there'll ever be, you know, a way to bridge the gap between the community and the police, the protesters and the police and the other side of things? And how can we do that? Or what are your ideas for doing that?
Sure. Well, I always believe in transparency and conversation. I think that, you know, 99% of Portlanders can kind of come together with a shared vision. You know, I think there's also important to recognize that there is kind of a faction of protesters who, and this was not BLM, you know, this is kind of more the anarchist fringe of the protest, who I don't think they're actually looking for solutions. I think they're looking to destabilize the system. And those folks probably are, you know, until they sort of get a little bit older, it's probably going to be hard to, you know, get those people to the table and get a shared vision with them. But I think, you know, even the Black Lives protesters, I think, and the sort of demands for abolish the police or defund the police, let's focus on the defund side. I think most of those folks who say defund are really talking about developing a broader vision for how we develop public safety.
Yeah, I think the word sounds kind of harsh to some people.
Yeah.
Like when I've interviewed people, I'm like, what do you think about defunding? And they're like, oh no, but we do want funds to be put into other things. I'm like, well, that's, you know, the same thing, but it's just not as a harsh way to say it, really.
Yeah. I understand the power of that branding, and I think it's also important for the folks who use that language to recognize some of the drawbacks. It definitely freaks a lot of people out, and a lot of people who I think probably fundamentally agree with them. You know, would you like to see the system, you know, be fair and to not reinforce, you know, historic racial inequalities? But people, you know, there are lots of folks who think, you know, if you've ever actually needed the police, which will happen to almost all of us eventually, you really want them there.
Right.
And so I think there's a compromise.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely understand having other resources for, you know, trauma victims or people that are having a mental breakdown. But when it comes to gun violence, I'm trying to think of somebody who can come in other than the police. I mean, I've thought of it a lot. I've thought about it a lot, and maybe having police without weapons, but then what if the weapon gets drawn on them? So it's really difficult to figure out a different way other than the police.
If I may, there is a program that I'm really excited about that we have going on here in Portland. The PS3, which are basically unarmed police officers or public safety officers who respond to the kinds of police calls that don't require a gun. Let's say you had some property stolen in the middle of the night. Instead of sending out a cop to respond to that, which is like sending out a Marine, we send out, an unarmed police officer who's well equipped for kind of filing that paperwork and doing the things that, we can do to try to get your bike back or your car back.
Cahoots?
Yeah, exactly. So
that's
the street response team. It's based on a program coming out of Eugene, or that's been going in Eugene for about 20 years now. It's been highly effective. We're really excited to get it up and running in Portland. I think we are starting in Lintz, and hopefully we will. Well, I'm going to make sure I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure that program gets up this winter because I think it's really important. And it could be and promises to be just a real paradigm shift in how we go about keeping people safe, especially our houseless community. So that, once we get that going, policing in Portland is going to look really different. I'll combine that with the PS3 program, where we have unarmed officers doing a lot of the work that doesn't require guns. I think between those two things, we will dramatically change how we respond to 911 calls, and we will have a much less militarized police force. So I'm really excited about making those changes, and they're right there kind of on our fingertips. We just have to execute at this point. We know how to do it. We just have to actually get it done.
Yeah, I'm really excited to see those in action. But to me, it just seems like, something that's fantasy. So I'm really excited to see it happen, especially since I know that less funding is going to the police in the near future. So hopefully some of that will go to those programs. Do you think they'll mainly be used in the houseless community?
The street response teams are essentially targeted towards the houseless community. So that, those folks who are, or anyone who's having a mental health crisis, frankly, but typically that tends to be the folks who are without a home. The PS3 program that I've talked about would be and already is citywide. I think we have about 30 of those men and women out there on the streets already doing great work. They haven't gotten nearly enough attention and praise. And I think one of my jobs over the next couple of months is to shine a spotlight on that important program and see what we can do to keep it growing and take care of the public safety needs of Portlanders.
Great. So what is the education level to get to be a part of that program? Do you have to have like a nursing degree, the
street response team, or the so the street response team, I believe we have the street response team, which is basically the one targeted towards homelessness. You would have to I'd have to do more research on that. I know the general concept here is that we have someone who's trained in crisis de-escalation and mental health issues. That's one of the reasons why we're running it out of the fire department. They have that kind of paramedic capabilities, and so we want to be able to take those kinds of skill sets and connect them to folks in the community, houseless folks.
And you said that the PS3 program's already running. How long has that been around? Because I haven't really heard about it.
Yeah, it's, I would have to do, I know we started to try to set this up. I used to work over at the city in the crime prevention program, so I remember the ramp up to this program. And so we probably started working on it as a city about 2 years ago. I just had a conversation yesterday, which indicated that we have, I think, about 30 folks out there on the streets. It's one of the reasons why these things take a long time is the training piece. You actually have to train people how to do, be a public safety officer, and it's a different kind of public safety officer. You're not a cop. So I believe Sergeant Greg Stewart is the one who's leading up that program. And I worked with Greg probably 2 years ago as he was figuring out how training would work. I'm sure COVID didn't help at all, but they're up and going, and I'm hearing really great feedback from people on the street and people in the public safety system. So look out for that one. We're going to be.
Cool. I'll keep my eye on that.
I will. If we invite me back, and I'll try to get Greg on, and we can unpack this a little bit more.
All right, sounds good. So they've been around for about 2 years, and a lot of them are firefighters, or they're working with the firefighters.
Oh, the firefighters. Well, the street response team is basically kind of embedded in the fire department, although that's, and basically the idea would be that you this is probably not officially correct, but with the street response teams, you basically want to send out a paramedic and someone who can kind of negotiate for the paramedic.
Okay.
But I think that's the most intuitive way to think about it. And the PS3s are basically cops who don't do, the violent part of copping. Do the PS3 cops attend the protest, or do they help with the protest? Because I know that there are some police officers that are trained in de-escalation and I've actually seen them talk to protesters. I didn't know that they were actually trained to go out there and do that. I can confirm that. I know many of the officers who actually do that kind of mediating work at protests. But no, the PS3s are more like day-to-day folks. Like, if you were to call the non-emergency number for the police department, I don't know if this is literally true, but my instinct is if you were to call the non-emergency number, increasingly the folks who will follow up on that are probably officers without guns, who will come and kind of do the paperwork on your stolen car, and then make sure that information gets out to probably officers in squad cars who will keep an eye out for your vehicle or your bicycle or whatever it is you're looking for.
Okay, very interesting. I'm going to look more into that.
Google Greg Stewart. Okay. He's the guy in charge of that one.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
I think we only have a few more minutes. I just wanted to, for my last question, or I might have more after I ask you this one, but when you connected with those, 12, 15,000 Portlander community members, what did you learn from talking to them, aside from their view on police reform?
A thing that unites every Portlander is that we really love this city. That's why we're here, is that Portland is such a special place, and we have so much hope for this place, and we're so invested in it. Everyone wants to kind of pull together and make this work. But if you talk to folks, there are two issues which are always going to come up, houselessness and police reform. And affordable housing too, but really like houselessness and the environment. So those are things that we talked about a lot. Transportation was a big issue. It's funny to think about now, but if you go back a year in time, we as a city were deeply concerned about traffic congestion, which has been solved a little bit, but when things get back to normal, the traffic congestion is going to be right back where it was. So developing strategies for that. You're absolutely right. One of the things that makes Portland a special place, and kind of one of the reasons and mechanisms that it kind of burrows into your heart, is that it's such a beautiful place, and we're all deeply concerned about keeping our rivers running clean and our air clear. I think those wildfires from the fall, I guess, summer, it all blends together now, was a real wake-up call to the fact that we just have this one planet, and we all got to breathe the same air, and we need to do what we can do to make sure that planet Earth stays afloat.
Definitely agree. Do you have any kind of goals for to protect the environment, or protect?
Oh yes, absolutely.
Things more sustainable in Portland.
Absolutely. We're definitely talking to the mayor about our bureau assignments. So at this point, I don't know exactly what portfolio I will get when I'm on city council. I could get everything from, we have every member of city council is a commissioner of a couple of different bureaus. So, you can think of the mayor as being the commissioner for the police department. You can think of Joanne as being the commissioner for the fire department. Currently, our new commissioner, Dan Ryan, is in charge of the essentially houselessness in the city. The mayor gets to decide what assignments I get and what assignments incoming Commissioner Carmen Rubio will get. No matter which bureaus we get, we are deeply committed to bringing an environmental perspective. Even if we're doing civic life, for example, which is just about encouraging, community engagement. We're going to do that work with a deep commitment to also being environmentally aware. And if we get the Bureau of Environmental Services, we'll also kind of approach that work with a deep commitment to maintaining and promoting citizen engagement. So, if there are two themes that we really want, if there are three themes, let's say there are three things we really want to do, we want to focus in on over the next couple of years is, responsiveness, for sure. We want to make sure that we don't, we listen to people and we follow up. We want to be evidence-based, and we want to kind of focus in on a handful of core issues like making a dent in chronic homelessness, bringing more affordable housing online, as you mentioned, making progress on climate change and police reform, and finally changing our commission form of government.
Okay, that's something that I wanted to get into, but I don't think we have a whole lot of time to get into that because I know
that's a whole show in and of itself.
The whole thing. There's kind of 5 different mayors for the city, is what quoting you from a different interview. What do you have any idea which bureau you might get control over, or it's all up in the air at this point? It's all up in the
air. I've had some very preliminary discussions with the mayor's office. He has a challenging job. I trust the mayor's integrity. I think he's trying to put the players he has in the sort of strategic spots. I've told him the mayor and I pretty much had the conversation that you and I have had, so he has a good sense of what skills I bring to the table and what my vision is, and I've assured him and every other member of council that I'm here to make council better, and I'm here to make Portland better, and I can't wait till January 3rd when we at least symbolically get inside the building and get to work.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining me today and having this wonderful conversation. Congratulations on your new position.
Thank you. It's a true honor. I encourage everyone to stay safe and stay engaged in these discussions. We can't solve this unless everybody's at the table. So I look forward to seeing you at the table come 2021.
Definitely. I'll be there. All right. Well, have a great night.
Thanks. You too.
Thank you again.
Sure. Bye-bye.